There's this video here from this guy, goes by Roro, or it's just really funny. These new music producers are lame as F. Actually, I think I might just do this one next. Let's just see what he's talking about. Like, I watched the first 5 seconds and I was like, this might be cool to talk about. So, shouts to Roro, or Roro. I don't know. Well, let's see what he's talking about here.
Hello, Internet. If you're a music producer and you take a loop from Splice and put it in a project file, leave it as is. Take a drum break that you found, put it in a project file, leave it as is. Is that your beat? Are you an artist? Are you a music producer? I would say it's complicated, you know? I think something...
It is very complicated. It is very, very complicated.
Like taking a Splice loop, putting it in a project file, a lot of people would say that's not really beat making. You know what I mean? But if you were to take a vinyl record, record an 8-bar loop, put it into a project file, and then somebody raps on it, you're a godlike producer, you know?
That's a very interesting take. I'm curious where he goes with this, because there is something to be said about, we've talked about it on the New Old Heads a lot about, or not a lot, but some, about, how this new wave of just taking a loop of something and just playing it and then just letting that mug roll. What's really the difference of doing that as opposed to going to Splice and throwing on a little drum loop of stuff that's already made for you? The main difference there is that when you do that, you're at least digging. There's a digging element that's involved. You know what I mean? The digging element is important for that. But I don't know. I don't know, man. Let's continue this.
So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy in the realm of making beats. And I think there's a lot of valid opinions on both sides. So I kind of wanted to just talk about that today. So when I first started making beats, this was early 2010s, there was a bit of a revival of kind of 90s boom bap music production with vinyl samples and kind of swinging drum grooves and stuff like that. Like Jay Dilla, Stones Throw Records, Pro era, Joey Badass, that kind of era.
Well, those are two different eras. I mean, Dilla was late 90s, obviously up till 2006, and Pro era didn't drop until the blog era, but I see what he's saying.
And it was basically not allowed for you to sample stuff from YouTube. And that's something that I would do often with my friends. But it was sort of like a taboo,
That's facts. It was frowned upon. It was definitely frowned upon.
People didn't really...
And it still kind of is. And the reason why it's frowned upon, well, there's definitely the old heads, right? There's the elitists producers that are just kind of you need to be getting your fingers dirty and go digging in the crates. There's that aspect, right? And you need to know where the record came from and all that stuff as well. But there's also another component that a lot of people don't talk about, is that if you're ripping stuff from YouTube, the quality's not as high. So
I think that was acceptable in the real music producer scene. But I did it anyway. And there was even times where I would sample something from YouTube, run it through a cassette, and then resample it into my beat, just so that it would sound like I got it from a cassette or some analog source. But it's I was just ripping stuff off YouTube.
Yeah, man.
A lot of people do that. And I think the modern version of that is just people using splice loops, because sampling from YouTube is just normal now. No one really questions that. But something like a loop pack or a splice loop, people hear that and they're like, oh, this is, I recognize this loop from this pack. It's one of the most popular loops on Splice, and now it's in a Billboard charting song. That's not really fair. But it's the same people 15 years ago were like, oh, this record has been sampled so many times. This producer doesn't know what he's doing. So
I think there's another element to this, and this is something that I kind of talk to my students too about, is there's nothing really wrong with using a sample pack, but you got to flip it. And this is across the board. I'm not trying to hear 19 rappers rap over the same sample, in the same sense that I'm not trying to hear 19 rappers rap over the same loop. But there becomes more of a legal / creative problem with this, because if you use the same loop on some joint that somebody else uses, and they get to the content ID system before you do, then you can be essentially paying into them. You got to chop it. You got to flip it. That's the rule with everything. You got to take it to the next step. you've got to take it that next step forward and like make it your own. Like, I'm not really trying to hear like a known drum pattern on top of a known loop, you know?
I think just as time progresses, as technology advances, as the culture changes, people's perspectives change, right? As a new producer, especially if you have no background in music, it takes such a long time to make something from scratch that like sounds good, that's like acceptable, that you enjoy listening to.
Yeah.
So a quick way to get to that point is using loops. So
yeah, and I would say on the same, with that being said, and maybe I'm a little bit of elitist here, but like you should suck for a while. Like you should be asked for a while. You should not be able to just pick up a software or just all of a sudden be like, man, I really want to do this. Let me go out and immediately sound like Ninth Wonder or 14KT or Tall Black Guy or Major Seventh or anybody like that. Like you should struggle a little bit, because there should be a learning curve for you understanding the things that you are doing, and that gives you a little bit of time within that. So don't get me wrong, like I don't expect people to struggle for like 3 to 5 years like I did, but at the same time, you should be able to know how to manipulate a sample, and you should be able to know how to a little bit of music theory. You should know how to do some drum stuff. You should know how to like if you strip everything away, I feel like we got to be able to have a conversation. Like if you come up to me and you're at a beat showcase and you're playing me some beats, and then I come over and I have a conversation with you and we talk about some stuff, but the only thing that you can talk about is like loops, and you don't have any type of understanding, like what are we even doing?
for me personally, I wouldn't use splice loops for my beats, but I'm also not going to be upset with a new producer who's trying to learn how to make beats and just wants to make something that sounds good.
And that's cool, but why don't put it out? You know what I mean? This, you know, you don't have to put it out.
At the end of the day, if you're making songs, as long as it's a good song, it doesn't really matter how you made it. You know what I mean? Like
it does to a degree. Again, it does. Like stuff does actually matter to a specific man. I don't know. Maybe I am a little bit of an old head in this manner right here, but like it does matter to some degree.
It doesn't really make a difference. It's just a different game now. You know, like I really like composing. Like I have like a classical music background. So I'm of the mentality of I like to
This dude got one of them cameras that just like follows you around. That's kind of cool.
compose as much of my music as possible. With that said, I do enjoy sampling too, but I consider sampling like a different art form than composing.
Right.
You can, it's all a matter of perspective. This is just how I perceive my own music. But I do think that there's something to art versus business, you know? Like, if you're getting into music to make money and to make it a business, then you're not really going to be maximizing your potential if you're sitting making all your own beats, right? That's going to take a longer time. It's not going to be like optimal for business because it's going to take more time. There's more factors, you know. It's harder to make something from scratch that people like as opposed to just something that you know people already like. I think that's also like why sampling old songs
I'm like kind of waiting for him to get to the point here because like, you know, I know like we live in this capitalist society and everything, and we have to, and even as like creators, we have to pay attention to the business aspect of things, but I'm kind of waiting to see what one has to do with the other here.
Pop music now and like popular rap music is it's like the meta right now because people just want to hear something that they already like. It's like we're in like the Marvel movie remake era of hip hop right now as far as pop stuff goes, like radio hip hop. That's kind of where we're at. People can be upset by that, but it's like it's the music industry. It's pop radio. Like, what do you really expect? He's
kind of yapping right now. Like I thought the beginning of this video, I thought he was heading somewhere, but I'm not sure where he's heading.
Like, if you're looking for like substantial art in music, you shouldn't be going to pop radio in the first place. So it's like, let those people do their thing. Who gives a fuck?
Okay.
That's my mentality.
I can dig it.
But yeah, as far as like using loops and people being late, like people are like, oh, producers are lazy.
That's true.
I think that there is some truth to that. But I also think that people just don't really know what they're doing, you know? Like, I have friends that are like in the music industry, and they're very talented, but they're around people that have no idea what the fuck they're doing.
I think it's because the barrier for entry is so low. Like, it's so low right now. Now, we've talked about this on the New Old Heads too, but it's like the barrier for entry into just like making music is that the younger generation that's getting into this is simultaneously thinking about creation and content at the same time.
But they're successful because they're good at business. You know, like, in order to succeed in the music industry, a large part of it is just being good at business. You know, like, the music is not even like the main thing necessarily. But for someone like me, I care a lot about my art. I care a lot about the art that I make, and I want it to be personal and an expression of myself. So it's kind of hard to do that using other people's music, you know, and that's sort of why I've gravitated away from sampling. Again, I love sampling. I got my start making beats sampling records, but I'm not going to like go around to new people and be like, you're not a real producer because you don't, you know, do what I think you're supposed to do. I think that that's stupid and pretentious. And, you know, it's one thing to like, I'm not even like anti-gatekeeping. Like, I think gatekeeping has its place and is valuable. But for me personally,
come on, Roro, I need you to make a firm stance.
Personally, I just don't really care what other people are doing. You know, like, if you're getting mad at somebody else being successful because they used a splice loop in their song and it blew up, it's like, you're just mad at yourself for not doing the same thing. You know what I mean? It's like, again, when has this shit ever been fair? When has this shit ever been like all about making good art? You know, but again, you can use a loop and make a good song. It doesn't matter. So I think that people forget that music is art, and a lot of people think of music as just business and a way to make money.
Right.
And, you know, those people are going to exist no matter what I think, no matter what anybody thinks. So I don't really see the point of getting all that mad about it, you know?
There are reasons why when I get new students in my class, I don't allow them to use sample loops or splice or anything like that. My goal is like, look, I don't want y'all to use them unless you're good, but I want y'all to be able to make them, because that's going to help you in your career as a music producer. It's cool to just make music if you just want to make music and never give it to people, or if you just want to, like, what's the word? Moonlight as a music producer by like downloading a couple loops and getting together and like pretending like you're doing something. But that's really all like using loops and breaks is for the most part. Don't get me wrong. There is a puzzle that's being crafted together with that, but like, and don't get me wrong, you know, if you can make something slap with it and you're working with people, there's just levels to it. I think that's all there is to it. There's just levels to it. Like, if you like to chop samples up, or you just like to loop stuff and add drum breaks, that's cool, man. That's cool. If you just like to do splice stuff, and then, all right, that's cool, man. But like, it's different when you're like remanipulating it and you're like taking something that's like given to you and you're repurposing it. And, you know, I think it's perfectly fine to criticize people that do that just take stuff and take loops and just put a bunch of stuff together. And then, because a lot of times that also like coincides with this inflated ego of like, look at all the stuff that I've done. You know, it's like, all right, man, like I could have sat and made 100 beats in 20, you know, in 2 hours if I did that as well. But like, that's not really crafting anything. So I'm yapping at this point. So let me just keep it moving here.
Then you almost feel like you got duped because it's a loop. You're like, oh man, I really liked the song, but now that I know it's a splice loop, I don't like it. It's like, well, maybe you should focus on making music that's better then. You know, don't hear that and get upset about it. Hear that and be like, this is motivation for me to make art that's good. This is motivation for me to make a song that's actually good, that I wrote and I composed. You know, whether you're producing yourself, working with a producer, working with an artist, like a rapper, singer, whatever it is, just make the best art that you can make. Just ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And for some people, this might be a hot take. For some people, in order to make the best art that they want to make, they have to use loops, at least at the time. You know, like maybe down the road, they'll learn more about scales and keys, keyboards, and like chord progressions and melody.
I think this brings up like a very interesting conversation about like gatekeeping and music production. When I'm just going to use myself as a reference. Like when I started making beats, and I literally told this to students yesterday night, new students that I had. And I was like, when I started making beats, like I sampled really heavily. Number one, because I love like soul samples and I love sampling. It's just fun to do. But But at the same time, like I did it also because it was a crutch, because I couldn't play anything yet. Like when I started, even though I had 6 years of experience of playing trumpet and all this other stuff, like, and understanding the music theory, like I couldn't make the stuff like slap the way that it needed to. So I sampled a lot and I used a lot of breaks. And, you know, eventually it got to the point to where I was like, you know, let me not loop, let me chop some stuff up because I can make my own thing. And in general, like it just took me a long time to get decent. It just did. Like every once in a while I would get lucky, but it took me a long time to get decent. But I had the luxury of like, it was pre-internet. There was no YouTube when I started making beats. And so like I had a lot of time to like make stuff and then try new stuff and try new stuff. And there wasn't this like competing thing to where like, all right, let me make a beat and put it on the internet so people can hear, you know, except for like SoundClick, right? But those were like my actual beats. Nowadays, like it's just this different type. I just don't think a lot of it's production. A lot of it's just not anything. So I don't know, man. I think there's a level of gatekeeping that's okay when it comes down to like, there should be people that tell people that make loops like, oh, that's cool, man. You got anything original? You got anything? Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with like pushing people to be better at the art form that they want to be a part of, you know? And I think that's a good thing. So, you know, to each their own. I honestly don't care either way, but if you step into my class or something like that, I'm going to be like, yo, like, I'm going to tell you about yourself. Not in like some like angry type of like condescending type of way, but I'm going to ask you. I'm like, all right, cool. This, you know, if you come into my class and you take a class about Ableton and you make beats and then you play me beats, I'm going to ask you, did you use loops for that? Did you make it from scratch? Did you make your own drums? What did you do? Like, how did you make this? And if they say, oh yeah, you know, I got a splice pack and I just put these together. I'm like, all right, cool. That's cool. Fine. Who cares? But at the same time, like if you're doing it for the creative sake of being an artist, that should not be enough for you. You should want to know how people are making that stuff. And you shouldn't want to like bypass it and try to trick people into being like, yeah, I started off and I was dope from the beginning. Like, nah, bro, no, you're not. You know, so I don't know. I feel like there's this is a weird conversation in the producer community sometimes where it's like, on one angle, it's like, no, I don't really care because I don't care. You know what I mean? But like, if you're going to step into my circle or we're going to have conversation, like we can't even have conversations sometimes. Like I can't have a conversation with you if you don't really make music. You know, I don't know.
And then they'll start writing their own music. But if they don't, who cares? It's not for everybody. It doesn't really make a difference. I'm a big fan of The Alchemist and that style of production, like the sort of like drumless loops, you know, whatever. But a lot of times those dudes are just ripping a 4-bar loop from a record and looping it and then maybe pitching it up a little bit.
Yeah.
You know?
True.
And you could argue that like, yeah, but they had to find the record and they had to dig and they had to find the spot on the record that was good and loop it, and having an ear for sampling.
And there's a talent
is
for that.
An art form in itself, which I agree with all of that. But that's not really accessible in the modern day. You know, like vinyl records, sampling vinyl is sort of a niche thing.
Yeah, not if you're a hip hop producer though, right? I mean, like if you call yourself a hip hop producer, if you have the money for a laptop and YouTube and software, like you can go and buy a $100, $200 turntable, a cheap one, or you can buy a used one. You can go to get some dollar bins. You can go to Goodwill. You can go to your local record store. Shouts to Indie City and Vinyl. You can buy some used records. You can, you know, like, and then you can practice doing it that way. I think people are just lazy in the sense, and I don't mean this necessarily in a derogatory term. People are just lazy in the sense as they want everything like just presented to them right away. And that's the one thing about like sample packs is like people are just doing the hard part, or not even hard. People are just doing the part that takes a little bit of time to put it all together.
It's not something that everybody's going to be doing. And I think that's okay. I'm just some white dude rambling about my thoughts on hip hop production. So I totally understand if you don't care about what I'm saying, but if you watch this far in the video, you must care. So, you know, maybe watch some other videos I made.
Shouts to Roro. If nothing else, I like that name. So these new music producers are lame as fuck.